assist us with decision making, which is more accurate, which leverages on data. So basically, because I want to wind up and take some questions from you, is that AI is very important. I was the chairman of the AI and blockchain task force. We developed the roadmap for the country. We are looking forward to have some policy framework, because we have no choice. Already there are several AI solutions on the ground. It's just that people don't know. We are doing several things around SMEs. We are doing several things in terms of what I said, LLMs and natural language processing. This is where the lawyers must begin to be interested, rather than, say, staying different people teaching it, then it doesn't work for you. This is an opportunity for us going forward, which would create huge amount of productivity by going through the legal processes in Kenya and telling you similar cases or similar processes of negotiation, and it helps you to do that. But I emphasize that we need to train it our own language so that it can be more relevant to what we are doing. I think I would stop here for a few more minutes. I said I must go by 3:15, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak to you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. Can I take a few questions? Any questions?
Is this working? Wonderful. Ambassador, it's great to have you here. You mentioned that you're on the blockchain task force, and I was interested to hear that in Kenya, the land registry is being moved to blockchain as a means of making the records secure so that they can't be stolen or owners of land can't be defrauded. Could you perhaps say a little bit more about that and about the other exciting things that the blockchain might offer for Kenya?
Yes, thank you for asking that. We had first started with the digitization process of the lands ministry, basically because it used to have a record which nobody wants to hear, that it was the most corrupt department at the time. And I remember the first thing we did was the registry. And we did the front office, and once we finished with that, the revenue rose from, it used to be 800 million to 9 billion in 6 months, meaning that if we dealt with, if we digitized the entire ministry, not only that the government would collect significant amount of money, but also it would create some level of transparency and trust. And later on, as blockchain came, we thought it would be the easiest way of doing it, making it easier for lawyers to know who actually owns the piece of land someone is trying to sell. And it would reduce the time it takes. I think some of the lawyers there will tell you it takes almost up to 2 years to transfer property from one person to the other, which is very costly. Imagine less than a day to transfer property. It takes 1 hour to transfer. It will be more productive, and it would be less conflict, because we still have a lot of conflict with the land transfer. So blockchain will provide more transparency. It will provide more transparency and be able to help the government of Kenya to collect more revenue, and we can trust the department better.
Thank you.
Ambassador, this is Shai Wade from RPC. If I may add a quick question for you, I know you don't have much time, but I'm interested in how you foresee AI regulation being introduced in Kenya. Do you see the future in what terms? National legislation, robust, gentle, how do you see it developing?
Well, we have been recommending collaborations across the world. Nobody can tell you that we have a table-proof regulation policy in place. I think it's to learn from others, but we need to leave it, move forward. And what we recommended is that we should be having what we call legal sandboxes, where the regulators can work with the innovators to make sure that we proceed with innovation while we're trying to see how to protect the customers. We have one sandbox in the what do you call it, Capital Markets Authority, and we wanted to move to other areas where we can have such. But right now, what we are working, I've been working in the EU teams to see what they're doing. It is not to put regulation out ahead of innovation. Always innovation precedes regulation. That's what we did with M-Pesa and succeeded, and we want to be able to do a similar thing.
Hello, Ambassador Professor. This is Kanan Muta from Nairobi. I just wanted to get your comments on and thoughts around that data privacy and the lessons that we need to teach AI, the extent to which it gobbles up a lot of our information and how that is used. I think we've seen some risks coming up from replication of data on the ChatGPT forums, where I think some lawyers, I think, are using that platform, putting in confidential information, which is then used or regurgitated in different forms. I also wanted to hear your thoughts around the benefits of AI. I think are apparent, but how do we balance the convenience against the risks that appear to be somewhat inherent in the use of AI? And then lastly, guarding against, I think in the legal circles we've seen hallucinations from AI, where it makes up its own form of information. So how do we sanitize that because of the human error that can feed into that system that's supposed to be somewhat sanitized? Thank you.
You have asked many questions, some of them very good, some are very difficult, but let me try and see what I can answer as many as I can. Yes, what we need to begin to do, the sessions like today are informative, where we can create information that AI should not replace human beings. AI should help us, it should augment what we are doing. If you understand it that way, then we can't get into the problems where people are dumping everything onto ChatGPT to expect a solution out of it. It makes mistakes also. They make a lot of mistakes, but people, even it warns you that what we have provided you could not be right and stuff like that. As I said, there is a significant amount of data that it can provide you a precise answer. I mean, it's the same as if you are a judge, you are seated, you need a lot of data from the lawyers to be able to make a decision. We haven't provided AI with such amount of data. We don't know what it is learning when we say generative AI. So information to be able to make certain decisions and give you a result. The lawyers who are using ChatGPT, like what you've said, are making mistakes. At the moment, it augments. You can search you say similar cases, you search for that and do a comparison with what is happening local. You can try by yourself to look at the cases where you get the summary and look at the actual to see whether it is true. Then it augments. You are able to give when you are talking to the judge, you are able to give certain, I don't know what we call it, citation in academia, but there's a name you call it in the legal processes, where you cite some previous cases and they are correct. AI can provide you with that. You can put huge documents of AI, of documents into AI, and it gives you a summary. You can check against that before you are able to use. So at the moment, AI will improve productivity of your output because it can be able to give you information at a very short period of time.
Ambassador, thank you very much for joining us. We are humbled that you honored our invite. I know you are running off somewhere else. Thank you very much, but we stay long for our next panel. They're just going to be answering a few questions on the issue of AI and arbitration. Other than that, thank you very much for joining us, Ambassador. All right, off to our next panel. Are we excited? Yes! I needed that. Thank you very much. Allow me, join me in calling next to the stage our next panel. Mr. John Ohaga, Senior Counsel. He's the Managing Partner at OK Law Advocates, and his team legal leader, renowned for his expertise in dispute resolution. He chairs the Sports Dispute Tribunal and the ADR Policy Committee. He has been nominated to ICSID and ICC panels. And because I know there's a dinner tonight, I will not read his whole bio, which is almost 3 pages. You can find his bio on page 17 of the booklet. Karibu sana, Senior Counsel. My next panelist, Alan William. Alan is a commercial and financial dispute partner in the London office of Reynolds Porter Chaplin, RPC. Alan recently handled a $1 billion claim for Nigeria against JP Morgan, which was litigated in the commercial court in London, but he also handles international arbitration. He has a keen interest in the impact that artificial intelligence will have on the conduct of dispute work on business and in the legal sector. Karibu Alan.
Karibu sana. Delighted to be here, I should say. Thank you, Leila.
My third panelist, Jomo Nyaribo, is a partner and head of litigation and dispute resolution at MAN Advocates. He has over 19 years of practice as arbitration counsel and more than 10 years as arbitrator in cases arising from different sectors and jurisdiction. He has been ranked by both Chambers and Partner and Legal 500 in dispute resolution. His bio is on page 37 of the program. Karibu sana. Sorry. Next, we have Helen Armstrong joining us online. Helen is a partner in RPC's Tech Disputes team, specializing in resolution of complex technology and commercial disputes. She has advised and acted for clients on a wide range of disputes in the High Court with a particular focus on AI, outsourcing, and public sector technology disputes. Helen, karibu sana. My next panelist, Michael. Michael is a thought leader in the technology industry with a decade of experience. He's the co-founder of Evas Technology Africa, an AI startup focused on AI data protection and privacy. Something interesting about Michael, in 2019, he was awarded Business Daily Top 40 Under 40 Men Award for his role in driving digital transformations within the legal industry, making him the youngest recipient. Please join me in welcoming Michael. The next, Charlotte Kepadisa, I hope I've pronounced it well, is the head of Big Data and AI at Safaricom PLC. She has over 15 years of industry experience in developing and implementing comprehensive tools and tactics that allow raw data to be transformed into commercial action, as well as utilizing advanced data modeling and analysis. Charlotte holds an MBA from the University of Stellenbosch. I'm following Ambassador's advice. He said our languages and cultures. So until it's translated into Swahili, I will leave it to the Englishman to pronounce it. She's recently a certified chief digital officer from MIT. Karibu, Charlotte. The last man on the panel, Shay Ward, is a partner and head of RPC International Arbitration Group. He has over 25 years of practice as International Arbitration Counsel and more than 15 years as arbitrator in complex cases arising from a wide range of sectors and many jurisdictions. He has particular strong expertise in the upstream oil and gas and energy sector, as well as IT. Karibu. I think I'll take a seat. We have a 1 hour discussion. I've already introduced Helen. Just to start us off, perhaps, Charlotte, perhaps you could tell us what big data is all about, why it's important, and how does big data analytics work?
Great, thanks very much for that question. I'm very happy to be here and having this conversation with you guys. And I really believe that after this session, we'll be very much excited about the application of AI and big data in your environment. So as mentioned, I work for Safaricom. I'm sure you all know Safaricom if you're from Kenya. But what is it that we're about at Safaricom? So our mission is to transform lives. We want to transform lives, and we want to be a purpose-led technology company. Our purpose is anchored on 3 things. It's really through exclusivity. I believe all of you would be very familiar with M-Pesa, which is a way to really make everybody be able to send money, receive money, even with having a feature phone. And that was one of the biggest, I would argue, innovations in the world, allowing people to send money, receive money without having to go to the banks, without having to own a smartphone. Now, at Safaricom, and I'll get to what we use big data and AI for. We anchor our use cases on that premise, the premise around transforming lives. So in Safaricom, connectivity is for all. We don't believe that anybody should be excluded from connecting and from communicating because they cannot afford to have data or they cannot afford to have minutes to call somebody. So how do we do that through AI? We mine a huge amounts of data that we have on our network. I would also argue that we are probably we own the largest market share. So we know who you call, when you call the person, and we then use that information together with information about our network and how congested or how underutilized it is to then start to tailor-make offers for you at the right time. If you are making a call and you're only left with 20 bob, we're able to push an offer to you that is going to enable you to conclude that call. And based on your standing at a time, we were able to make it a lot more cheaper and a lot more affordable, because we know that you need to make and complete that call. So we are using, you'll see a lot of, some of our offers are hourly offers. We are able to give you monthly offers if you can afford, and the kind of person that buys monthly offers. But our ability to create bite-sized offers to make sure that we utilize every other base station, every other network, availability on our network to allow for people to communicate is very key. I think Prof also mentioned the inclusivity in as far as financial inclusion is concerned. Our ability to build credit scoring model, enabling the country to launch the Hustler Fund, is one of our greatest achievements, because through that we are able to extend financial services to people who did not have maybe a credit record, which in the past used to be a prerequisite for you to have a credit bureau record and therefore being able to be extended a loan. And we do so to make sure that we encourage innovation. We're able to give you capital to continue running your business. And last but not least, along the lines of large language models, which today we called, that informs Gen AI, we were able to build chatbots that can also speak in our local language. Our locally developed chatbot is actually as good as being able to understand Sheng. It doesn't matter what you throw at it. It's able to intuitively respond to you. And how did we get that? We were able to process large amounts of data that we get on our network to ensure that we better the services that we provide to our customers. And that is how we are using AI to make sure that we're leaving nobody behind in as far as financial inclusion is concerned, connectivity inclusion is concerned, but also being a part of this digital transformation of being able to be serviced at any time through the chatbot.
Thank you, Charlotte, for that. You've just mentioned about customer data. How are you using that data to drive Safaricom business?
Correct. As I mentioned, at any given point in time, you have a site, we call it site, there's base stations. We have a site that is underutilized. Now, if we know that from 9 p.m. to 12 p.m., to 12 midnight, there will not be a lot of utilization. We are going to give customers almost free, and sometimes even call it night owl offers, almost free data offers for them to enjoy using our connectivity to get on the internet, get their TikTok videos and just be engaged on the net. By doing so, we charge at almost close to nothing. But the reality is, if you look at our top line, there is additional revenue that we would not have gotten if we were not using data to analyze performance on our side. But the other one is our ability to curate new products and services. The way that you engage with our products, the way that you engage with M-Pesa, the way that you engage with GSM, voice or data, and some of our lending products, we are able to curate propositions that are especially for you. It can be make your bundle if you're somebody who wants flexibility in how you choose to consume our services. It can be a very discounted and dynamic pricing for your M-Shwari or Fuliza loan. All of these innovations are backed by analyzing huge amounts of data. Just in a second, we process close to just 1,500 M-Pesa transactions in a second. You can imagine how much data comes through. And we then use that data responsibly to ensure that we provide you the best service, but also we give you the right price point for your preference.
Thank you, Charlotte, for that. Michael, perhaps I could bring you into this conversation. Charlotte has told us about how they're using data to drive their business. Perhaps you could talk more about data mining and data exploitation. They've also been a concern, for example, when you walk into any building, you're told to sign that sheet of paper, you leave your phone number, ID number, email address, and all that.
Thank you, Leila. Speaking on data mining, essentially we all know that data is the new oil. At this current stage where the machine learning algorithms that are being created require a lot of data just for them to learn and to be able to do predictions. We do hope in the future that we don't need so much data to get these machine learning models moving. But in the current state that we find ourselves in, and we've seen cases across the world where for you to have a powerful as a system as OpenAI's ChatGPT or Midjourney or DALL-E 2.2 also by OpenAI, you have to scrape a lot of data off the internet. And the question of whether it's exploitative depends on, especially if it's online services, did you look at the terms and conditions and the privacy policy? A lot of companies just bluntly say it's been sold to third parties. Well, this data could be sold to third parties for quite cheap. And this third party also has the right to sell this data to another third party, which now becomes your third party's third party, which is not explicitly stated, but it's there. So you end up with, if your data is out there, or even if your data is not out there, give an example of what happened with Cambridge Analytica. They paid 750,000 people for data. They ended up with over 1 billion, data from 1 billion people, because while you may not be out there, someone is out there and they have a piece of your personal information. So that, at that stage, that may be exploitative. But in terms of mining, it's not illegal. What we've seen is the response from a lot of public-facing companies that are inherently data-focused, social media companies in particular, like Facebook and Twitter, are preventing bots and these agents that are doing the mining for these large language models and other AI tools from scraping this public data, because now they want ownership of the data. May be public, but they don't want to train someone else's machine learning, their LLMs for free. So, well, scraping is not illegal, provided that, of course, you have it in your terms and conditions and your privacy, and as long as it's publicly facing and accessible to any user who has an account on your platform or can view it publicly just by entering your URL, that data it's free for use. It's the internet. It's a bit of a wild, wild west, but that's what we have.
While we still have Mike with you, perhaps Mike, you could tell us what AI is all about and the practical use of AI in your daily life.
Well, AI is about a lot of things. In particular, it's in the simplest way, as I would define it, it's just putting human intelligence into machines. That is all. And we grow by level of where we put it. We've started off with two key things, which are very human, which is language and vision, because those two are very synonymous and heavily relied on by humans. Those are the two which, by coincidence and I guess by design, are what we've ended up working on. Oddly enough, there's a dictum by John McCarthy, who is credited as one of the godfathers for AI, and he says, as soon as something becomes AI, it is no longer AI. And that holds true for me personally, because ChatGPT is not an AI, it's a machine learning. It's machine learning, which is different from AI, where it does not have intelligence, but it behaves as though it has intelligence, and it lacks what is called epistemology, which is the theory of knowledge. It doesn't know that it knows, or it doesn't know that it doesn't know. It just answers, just input, output. So that portion of intelligence, we're able to see it as something that we can interact with and enjoy. In terms of our daily use, we've all interacted with AI, even if some of us as far back as 5-10 years without even knowing. Some of the recommendations you get, when Leila was speaking earlier during the introduction, saying you talk to someone on the phone or you browse something on YouTube and then you find those ads following you across Facebook and all these other platforms. There's the aspect of the data sharing. Of course, your data is being shared between all these third-party providers because you've given them the permission. But once they have this data, they have their own machine learning algorithms that then decide how to target you and when to target you. And we are seeing now a lot of transparency coming in terms of, for example, Facebook, one of the most notorious companies in terms of privacy, Meta, in terms of privacy, now coming out and saying, we'll be more transparent with why you see certain ads, how long you will see those ads, why we're recommending certain posts for you on our platforms, why the AI is doing this. So you can get a post on Instagram and you're told you're seeing this because you spent half an hour looking at similar images. You're seeing this because 20 of the 40 people you follow are also looking at this, so we think if it's of interest. So now they're being transparent and they're disclosing that. For me personally, in terms of my daily use for AI, as a software engineer, I mostly just write AI code for machine learning. I use ChatGPT, of course, a lot, but not for language. It's actually pretty useful if you are writing code because coding languages are very structured, unlike language, which is, if you can move a subject and a noun or a verb around and you change the meaning of a sentence. You do that in coding and you break it. So there's only one clear way to write it. And I use it also to generate images, to help me pass time if I need to just play around on the internet, write poems, summarize documents. I think I enjoy that when I have to read a report that's come out and it's 70 pages long on the future of AI. I also give AI to give it to me in 2 pages.
Michael, I could see the arbitrator's faces. I think you were speaking in Greek. Senior counsel did not understand anything you've said. But that's a story for another day. Charlotte, just before we move to the arbitrators, perhaps you could tell us the opportunities and benefits presented by the increased use of AI by corporates and businesses.
I think this world is really truly exciting. Just yesterday at Safaricom, we had what we call QBR, Quarterly Business Review. And within a week, we built our internal ChatGPT. And the reason for that is I really truly admire all of you guys because you tend to read a lot of documents and long documents. When I opened your email, I saw long things. I'm like, oh my goodness. But what we did is we have this QBR and it's got 160 pages where each division talk about what they did, how they perform, what they're going to do to do things different, whatever. So just very, very long documentation. So we quickly built a solution because it's either we're going to sit there, listen to people presenting what they've done all day, and really for some of us it's not the best use of our time. But then we built this thing and we enabled it for anybody to ask questions of what is in there and is what they're doing truly going to move the needle. It was so well appreciated, and that is where we are going, is the use of AI in bringing about operational efficiencies in organizations, and ChatGPT is one of those use cases, but also using AI to build new business models and new products. Our ability to really look at what customers want, what customers need, and based on their needs, be able to curate something that is specific for them is the future of AI. For instance, we're looking into getting into insurance. Could we build an insurance product that reduces premiums as you use? So the whole notion of every year you need to, your premium must increase because of inflation. Could we learn the behavior of your driving? And as you continue to be a responsible driver without hitting too many brakes and so on, then we start giving you discounted offers and actually reducing your premium. And then the part that I'm really passionate about, especially in the context of Safaricom, is through our 2 foundations, our M-Pesa Foundation and Safaricom Foundation, where we are solving for healthcare issues and agri issues. So we recently built a scorecard, a credit scorecard that enables us to lend to people that are in agri, but also in the healthcare space. Imagine if we were able to build a platform or operate a platform that you can engage with, press a button when you are not well, and it goes through your previous health history, locate the next available ambulance that's near you, it comes through to you, takes you to the hospital, by the right hospital that's got a bit of your history, and enables you to be attended to by the time you get to the hospitals. So those are some of the use cases that we're looking at to say, let us bring AI into our foundations to make sure that we truly elevate the goodness that we do generate from AI.
Thank you. Shai, what is the framework for AI? Is there any?
That was to wake up anyone who was falling asleep. You know what? I know about the framework for AI, but somebody who knows far better than me is Helen. So Helen, sorry to catch you by surprise. I can just about see your face on the screen. But the question of what is the legal framework for AI is, I think, one for you. The question of what is the legal framework for IA is for me. But, but you go first.
Number of benefits and opportunities, and everyone around the globe is thinking about how they can use AI to really make their businesses more efficient. But AI also comes with various risks, which will be discussed later in the session. And as a result, countries are having to grapple with how to regulate AI to make sure that harm isn't caused by it. It's fair to say that while almost all countries are considering the implications of AI, and some are already in the process of implementing legislation to deal with AI, the process of implementing legislation is generally very slow, and the pace of AI is very fast. So basically, countries are behind the AI itself. As a result, at the moment, there isn't really a framework, a specific bespoke framework, legal framework for regulating AI. Instead, we're having to apply general rules and laws that have been in existence for years to this new technology and the new risks that have grown out of the technology. So, for example, you have your data laws, your IP laws, your equality laws, and it's a case of applying those to AI and those new scenarios that AI are throwing up. But it's fair to say that countries are still doing their best, and there are examples of countries having already developed at least an approach to AI, even if they haven't implemented legislation. So, for example, the European Union already has a draft AI Act. The European Parliament passed the latest version of that Act in June of this year. The Act is based on a risk framework. So, the more risk that an AI system poses to humans, the less likely you are to be able to use that system. It could, in fact, be prohibited completely, but the less risk that it poses, the fewer the restrictions on that technology. So that's one way to deal with it, actually passing legislation that applies specifically to all AI systems. The UK government has actually taken a different approach. So it's decided not to legislate at this point in time at all. It published a white paper in March of this year where it took, it's fair to say, a very light touch approach to legislation. It's taken a very pro-innovation approach to AI regulation. It set out 5 key principles that it wants every sector regulator to be considering when dealing with companies that operate in their sector. I'll just run through them quickly because I do think they're helpful principles to bear in mind for anyone when they're thinking about using and implementing AI. The first is safety, security, and robustness. So obviously applications of AI should function in a secure, safe, and robust way where risks are carefully managed. I think that's the same whatever technology you use, whether it's generative AI or otherwise. Secondly, transparency and explainability. This is particularly key for generative AI because of the manner in which AI models work. There's a black box system and you don't know the process that AI model has gone through to produce the outcome it produces, because it's the AI's output, it's not our output. So really they want organisations to be transparent and to explain where they are using AI and how they're using it. The third is fairness. So AI should be used in a way which complies with the UK's existing laws, for example, the Equality Act and data laws like the GDPR. And it mustn't discriminate against individuals or create unfair commercial outcomes. And there certainly is a risk of that, which we'll touch on later on in this session. Fourthly, accountability and governance. So measures are needed to ensure that there's an appropriate oversight of the way that AI is being used. And that's because of the risk that AI goes wrong. There are errors in the output of AI. AI doesn't realise that there is an error, and you may not realise there is an error, but there can be errors, so there needs to be sufficient oversight to make sure that those errors are corrected before any harm is done. And then contestability and redress is the final principle that needs to be taken into account. So people need to have clear routes to dispute harmful outcomes or decisions generated by AI. Businesses cannot simply implement AI and rely on the outcomes of AI by saying, well, the AI produced that outcome. That's not the way that AI works. AI should be considered, I think, as a foundation. It speeds things up, definitely. It certainly makes things more efficient, but it's there as a foundation level to be used and to be built on by humans, to be worked on and to produce an outcome that builds on the AI outcome, but is ultimately something that humans are happy with and that they appreciate that the AI has produced something that is not going to harm other people and does comply with all the laws that it's required to comply with. So that was the approach taken back in March of this year. And it's fair to say that the government has rode back slightly from its very light touch approach originally and has now focused on putting up safety features and guardrails. So it's recognised that while they want to be pro-innovation, there does need to be some regulation. It's declined to comment on whether it will actually legislate in respect of AI regulation and whether that legislation will come in the current Parliament session or not. But they're holding a summit in November to hopefully gather lots of AI experts and various individuals from a lot of different countries across the world to really discuss and consider the risks of AI and how they can be mitigated. So hopefully after that summit, we'll have some more guidance on the approach, not just of the UK, but of other countries as well, potentially.
Thank you, Helen. Senior Counsel.
Helen has spoken, she's given an example of what is happening in other jurisdictions. Are the current laws evolving as quickly as AI? Do you think the laws can keep up with AI?
I think the straight answer is no. I think AI is evolving so quickly. And the reality is that legislation will not keep up with innovation. Michael can work overnight and come up with a product that is revolutionary. It will take some member of parliament to think through that, take it through public participation. I don't know how many readings of parliament before it's finally signed into law. So certainly I don't think that legislation can keep up with AI. Neither do I think it is desirable, because I think that AI is about creativity. Creativity is about freedom, allowing those with the skill set, the talent to be able to exercise their freedom, to bring it to bear on what they do, whilst legislation obviously is concerned with restrictions, is concerned with putting in guardrails, as Helen has said, and of course cannot see beyond where the AI is at the time when the legislation is coming into place. And so by the time the legislation is being tested, there will be something new that has evolved as a result of innovation. So I don't think, my own view is it's not desirable. I think that there are laws around copyright, intellectual property, data privacy, all those sorts of things. But I think that it would be I think it would be redundant to try and control AI by legislation.
Thank you, Senior Counsel. Michael, does the change in the legal framework only deal with data protection and privacy? And what are some of the rulings that are shaping changes in the laws?
Thank you. Maybe to speak on some of the rulings that we've seen. Quite recently, the US just ruled on a copyright matter for generative AI, where it stated you cannot copyright an image generated by AI because one, there are too many authors to say who actually own, who can claim a portion of that as their own. Secondly is the black box problem that Helen mentioned with AI. If, for example, if those who've used anything like Stability or, Stable Diffusion or DALL-E or Midjourney to generate images where you type in a prompt and then it produces an image, how the AI works in terms of if you ask for a cat wearing a hat, it will reference a whale, it will reference a chair, no one knows why, and it should actually look at cats, but it first looks at whales and chairs. 2 seconds later, it's looking at houses, it's looking at clouds, it's looking at human faces, and all that process, eventually you end up with your image. So everyone's image, when I only draw hands, but I can prove that my artistry has been used to draw a cat, the US ruled that it upheld the US copyright body's decision to deny copyright against that, but it also encouraged that new legislation should be drafted, at least to deal with such copyright issues. I think that was the second question. The first one, apologies. Oh, yes. There are so many other areas. We've all said how AI affects us in our daily life. Ideally, not just laws around data protection or introducing new laws and strategies around AI, but every law needs to be revisited. What happens when, for example, pick a small example, Cybercrime Act for Kenya, the Computer Misuse Act and Cybercrime Act. If I use an autonomous agent that then goes ahead and does something with an AI, and the AI goes beyond its guardrails in an instance and then ends up having to what would be considered a criminal offense, does that tie back to me as the author? Because what I built was to do good, but because it is autonomous, I have no control over it. For those 15 hours it was running, it caused something wrong. More concern is what we've seen is the issue of deepfakes. Now deepfakes are where you take someone's voice or image, or you take their video, or all of them combined, and you create a situation where they said something or they're doing something that's not there. Now, the term deepfake is very harmless, but these things have reputational damage to people and organizations. And the fact that these tools are readily available for use for free, and they serve a good purpose. An example would be an AI startup called Hygen, which develops AI avatars to attend meetings for you. And they've just recently released their beta 2.0, and it's been part of their test group. You type what you want, you give it the files you want it to understand and summarize, and it'll handle the meeting for you as if you're really there. And it just needs a 15-minute recording of yourself, just reading and talking. And then everything else from there, it uses a large language model to come up with your answers. They generate its own computer vision will make your lips move according to the right words. It's as if you are there. Now, that has, of course, implications as to someone could make that and say, I said something that was maybe defamed someone. More scary comes to maybe things to do with children and their protection of rights, where now we have people who have access to these tools, and you can take someone's image and then produce explicit content with it. And now this content lives on the internet, and we usually say, once it's on the internet, it's there forever. So there's a need to also consider how many if it's touching someone's life, what law also touches that person's life, and then creating protections against that.
I think just to add to that, it's important that much as there are lots of wrong things that could go wrong, and in any platform, as you know, there are bad players. The reality is, as we speak today, the good really outweighs the bad. But when the bad happen, it's really bad. So then it's important for us to, as a way to challenge my colleagues on the platform here, is to say, look at those nuances, things like deep fake, and quickly put something out there that says, if it's used in this way, then it becomes a privacy issue and it should be regulated. But equally speaking, as with many other revolutions, there is absolute efficiencies that we get in our economic system when we adopt some of these things that are as technological advances. So my encouragement would be, let us be realistic optimists, expound more on the good while allowing the bad players to be dealt by law, and therefore be very intentional in terms of dealing with those few bad players.
Thank you for that. We know it's a Friday afternoon. I don't know whether we still got your attention. If there are any interventions, this is the perfect time to have a break from listening to the panelists. Any questions from the floor? Yes, please. Mike here at the front.
Good afternoon. My name is Odhiambo Asembo, and we have spoken about having to allow freedom, right? And you said that having to regulate AI is interfering with freedom of innovation. But then we know that with freedom comes chaos. Freedom sometimes breeds chaos. And you say that it's redundant to control AI with legislation, because legislation comes slow, AI is developing very fast. So what then? What controls then can we have? Because from the risks you mentioned, controls, I think we really need controls, right? What controls then can we have if legislation is redundant?
Yeah, let me contextualize my thinking around that area. I think that we have legislation in place that, if applied and if necessary amendments are put in place, would be able to essentially provide the safeguards that we require. But if the intention of legislation is to control AI generally, then the point I'm making is that that will not succeed. Because once you come to grips with one aspect, it sort of mutates into a different direction. So can we look at the legislation that is presently in place and try and find ways in which that legislation can be read as broadly as possible in order to capture what Charlotte calls the bad aspects of AI, and ensure that those are brought within the boundaries of existing legislation. So, for instance, with protection of minors, for instance, there's legislation that addresses that. The penal code can be construed in a way which captures aspects of the way we deal with AI in order to ensure that misuse of it is controlled. But the attempt, my view is that the attempt to continually try to keep track with AI and legislate as it mutates is one that would be futile. That's the point I was making.
May I just add a very doomsday and rather pessimistic point of view. Helen and the ambassador and the senior have all expressed the view that it might be difficult to regulate AI. My concern about that approach is that whilst there may be a framework that applies to most situations, if governments do nothing or are seen to be doing nothing, at some point there will be a backlash and they will act suddenly and draconianly in a way which is unthoughtful. They will ban an entire section in the manner that you're concerned over. So I think it is better for governments to look at what they can do relatively quickly. Helen, I don't know if you would agree with me when I say that the approach of taking the professional organizations as the regulators of this area as well is inadequate, because so many of us don't belong to professional bodies. So there's the other side. I would act now if I were a government, because the social change that might evolve through introduction of new AI technologies, maybe in 5 years, not today, could be quite dramatic.
Yeah, let me just, if I may, let me just add a bit of local twist as well to it. I hope there's nobody from the AG's office or parliament here. But the tendency we have locally here is to be reactionary in terms of legislation. And that is likely to happen as well in this AI space, because we don't understand it, and therefore it's very difficult to legislate about it. So we wait and see what happens in the US, in London, in Europe, and then in some cases we literally copy and paste the legislation and sort of like run with it. But I think that has to change as well, because I think you lose a lot by always just following. I think you need to take the lead as well. Try some legislation, I think. As well, I think I agree with what Senior says in terms of legislation stopping innovation as well. It's important to innovate, because that's what leads to development and changes that I think we want to encourage as well. But I think locally here, I think African-wide problem is you always sort of react, and maybe that's an area that needs to be improved upon as well.
Maybe if I could just add on to what Jomo was saying, and it's probably one of the things which keeps me up at night. We've always copy-pasted legislation. We took the good from GDPR, we brought it in, that worked. With AI legislation, that does not work. Remember, well, how these tools are built. They're built, one, the people who are building it exist with their own morals, ethics, biases, and cultures. As much as we're just saying they're building a global tool, it's also influenced by the data that they are putting out there. And these regulations are built to either protect these entities or to put guardrails on them. An example which, and I might throw them under the bus a lot today, is Meta. Meta is one of the largest lobbyists in the US on any digital laws that come out. And if you look at how they lobby for them, it's to prevent non-US companies from getting either access to US data or forcing it to be harder for them so that they maintain their position. So if laws come from the US and they come into Africa, first of all, we are a net consumer of AI. We do not produce AI. So first of all, a huge chunk of that law does not have any place for us. We do not have semiconductor plants. We do not have GPUs. We're not building GPUs by the hundreds of thousands in months. We don't have large AI companies and plants. So if we do copy-paste, it is doomsday for us. I think we need to create legislation that, at the current state where Africa is, prevents Africa from becoming a data colony and protects the digital rights of Africans. When we get to the stage where we are building our own technology, then now we can legislate what guardrails, what safeguards, what use cases are allowed. Do we allow people to use AI to come up with ideas of building nuclear reactors? When we get to that stage, we can make such laws for that. But copy-pasting guys who are 30 steps ahead of us, using technology that has different cultural and social impacts, the same technology, but it has a different impact in the US that it has in Kenya or in Europe, I think we're just planning to shoot ourselves in the foot.
Thank you, Michael. Perhaps in the interest of time now we could move to the impact of AI on law firms and disputes. And we could start with Jomo. Perhaps you tell us how you are incorporating AI within your firm.
Thanks, Leila. I think I've had Mike speaking here today, and I'm wondering if I did research on the right thing. I'm wondering, is this, what is really AI? But I think one of the biggest problems I think I can say from personal experience is cultural acceptance of change. I think lawyers generally are very conservative. And the moment you introduce some level of change, there's always some resistance. And I think it's really important for us to be able to manage that transition within our own organizations as law firms, to do training, to do the necessary support, I think, for staff, and to make sure that the message is very clear that you need to transition or you perish, because it's a very competitive field. I think technology generally is important because it allows you to become more efficient, to become more accurate in your processes. And I think if you don't embrace it, there's a big risk, I think, of you losing out in the long term. In terms of the areas where it can help, I think generally speaking, in arbitration, majority of the arbitrations are usually document heavy. So AI can really help in your document processing. I think in the more developed economies, they do e-document processing, which maybe Shai can speak about, which allows, I think, you to go through a lot of volumes of documents in a very short period of time, extract the necessary information for you to make decisions about how you're going to manage and handle your matters. Another area which is a bit more controversial is decision-making and research on precedent. I think Ambassador spoke about it a bit. I think the intention really is not for you to sort of put in information in the system and extract a final decision, a final outcome. I think it's more to use it for decision-making, so that you're given an outcome which then helps you perhaps adjust the approach you're going to have in how you're going to address the matter as counsel. Maybe even help your client make a decision about settlement of a matter. Are we going to settle it? Are the chances of success are fairly low? You know, that sort of thing. So it can help. I haven't seen it myself here locally. I think it's a sort of system which is, I think, available in the more advanced jurisdiction, but I think it can be very helpful. We do have, I think, over time in Kenya here, we've transitioned into being able to do legal research online. I'm a bit of an old fogey. I think at a time we used to do legal research. Literally, you walk into the library and you start doing legal research, looking for cases. But then the moment now we're able to do online legal research, nobody goes to the library anymore. And everybody just trusts what the system sort of churns out. So I think be careful as well in trusting the system too much. It's supposed to be an enabler. It's not supposed to be a substitute for the role, I think, of a lawyer, of an arbitrator, or arbitration counsel.
Alan, if I could just bring you on board, what is the impact of AI on the business of a law firm that is conducting arbitration?
Thank you, Leila. And I should say it's fantastic to be here for Nairobi Arbitration Week. And I hope almost everyone in the room is still awake. In the interest of full disclosure, I should say that Google and Meta are big clients of RPC in London. Just stepping back and to try and wake you all up, this is a revolution that's about to happen. This is going to change everyone's lives across the world. If you look at ChatGPT now, it is so much more powerful than GPT 3.5. So to give you a quick example, as lawyers, GPT 3.5 was set loose on the New York bar exam, probably about a year ago now, and it came in the bottom 10%. But ChatGTP took it a few months ago and is now in the top 10%. So that the machine is learning incredibly quickly, and it's now better than most people taking that exam in the US. If you scroll forward 5 years, artificial intelligence will be 1,000 times more powerful than it is today. So this is really relevant to everyone's lives. It is going to change not just the business of arbitration and law firms, but everything. And I think to try and wake you up, and I haven't got slides, but if you can picture in your mind New York City in 1900, a busy street, it's full of horses and carts and one car. There's a famous photo. 10 years later, all the horses and carts are gone. It's all cars in 10 years. All those people who were looking after the horses and looking after the carts and making wheels and keeping them, all of them would have lost their jobs. But new jobs would have come and replaced those jobs. People making cars, people building stations where you can go and get petrol and gas. But it's huge, the change that happened then. This is like that change. It's happening. So I'd like to make that general point, just to try and wake everyone up a little bit. I think, just picking up on some of the themes from some of the panelists, big data is like the new oil, and companies are already using it to change their products and tailor them. And all of us in this room, even lawyers, even elderly lawyers, are already using AI because it's on your mobile phones, it's on Instagram, it's on Facebook, it's on LinkedIn. You're, as Michael said, having adverts pushed to you. So you're already using it. As lawyers, we sometimes might think that AI is remote from the work we do, but it isn't. It's already there. It's there for our clients. But it is going to change the business of law firms and the business of arbitration. Now, as a lawyer, I don't really use AI yet. I do use tech. It helps with research. It helps with document management. But maybe I'll give you a couple of examples of how tech is coming into the London market in this way, AI, and how it's going to make lawyers more productive, which probably means there will be less lawyers, but those that remain will be more productive. So to give an example, I'm an old-fashioned lawyer. I charge my clients by the hour. Probably you do the same too. I have a little smart timer. I click on it. At the end of the day, I'm meant to record a narrative, and it gets picked up, and then it gets picked up in the bill, and we charge a client. Within a year, I expect that will be gone. Instead, AI will be just sitting on the cloud, on the computer, and it will write all the narratives for me because it'll be looking at what I'm doing. When I'm drafting a letter, when I'm typing on my computer, it will recognize what person I am drafting the letter to, what matter it relates to, how much time I've spent on it. It will recognize when I'm doing a Teams call, what that call relates to. And so at the end of the day, instead of having to write out my own narratives and spend 20 minutes or half an hour doing that, it will produce a report. And I may take 2 minutes to amend that report. Maybe I will say I spent 5 minutes or 10 minutes more on a letter. Maybe it won't catch the fact that I've had a 10-minute conversation with a colleague in a meeting room. But it will save me time, and that means that I'll be able to spend more time working on client matters. We've all looked at, and Jomo has talked about the fact that you'll be able to do document management quicker. You'll be able to not bother drafting letters anymore. AI will draft the letters. Maybe in 2 or 3 years, it'll be drafting simple letters, a letter that's chasing the other side for a document. It will just do that. But in a few years, it'll be writing complicated letters. It'll be looking at the other side's submissions, and it'll be looking at them and saying, they've missed an important bit of law or an important bit of case law. That may be 3, 4, 5 years down the line. By 10 years down the line, it'll be writing the submissions itself. And I expect that particularly for lower value arbitrations, we won't need to have lawyers. Parties will be able to just put the documents in, and AI will make a decision. So all this, I hope, is terrifying you, but at the same time, because I want you awake, but at the same time, it is also going to be massively beneficial for clients. It will bring down costs. It will make law more accessible to people who can't afford lawyers now. So there will be upsides and downsides. And as a Kenyan lawyer put it to me over breakfast this morning, what AI won't be able to do, although maybe Michael and Charlotte will disagree, is have that social capital, that human touch. It will be less good at giving clients strategic advice. It will be less good at saying to clients, if you want to come and enter the textile business in Kenya, this is who you need to speak to. Here are the players. So I think we're going to have to be different kinds of lawyers and different kinds of arbitration practitioners. I think it's going to change everything. That's probably enough from me.
Any additions, Shai?
I think just the last one from my side. Every industrial revolution, if you study that, it has brought about efficiencies in the humankind. And that's what I would like for us to take away from this conversation, that AI brings about efficiencies, brings about inclusivity. It is whether we embrace it quick enough and see the opportunities that it brings about, as opposed to only dwelling on the negatives. And to your point, even in our space as AI, we've got what we call the post-scoring logic. So once you've run your model, we allow a human to intervene and add a bit of human capital to these models. Over time, we are working towards building autonomous agents that will recommend what a customer should buy when they should buy it. But the reality is it's human augmentation, and the intelligence is fed by the data that we intentionally generate to achieve a particular purpose. So it is here. It is to create efficiency in the economic ecosystem, and I really truly believe that we should embrace it.
Thank you, Charlotte. Shai, did you have anything to add?
I'm happy to go on for ages about how our profession will change, and how all of the young lawyers have said it before at the beginning of the week. You need to think about what you're retraining as. Because I think Alan was optimistic, or perhaps, I don't know if optimistic is the right word, but I think the free-to-user programs that are available will have these capabilities in 3 or 5 years. But the powerful ones, the good ones that you pay for, they're probably already developing our practice in the ways that you described. So one of the famous things that it is said that AI can do for us is write our cross-examination questions for us. And that's a service which is already available from promoters who ring us up and say to us, look, you want to look into this technology because you can save costs. What does costs mean? Of course, no offense to anybody who's below the age of 35, saving costs means you, right? That's what it's saving. It's true. And then the following or the development from that, which may already be here, but I'm not aware, I know that it's beginning, is AI, which is, I wrote down the term, not generative, but evaluative. So evaluative AI is already here to an extent and will improve dramatically. And that's the type of AI that can give you advice, that can look at 2 choices and say to you, okay, you're better off doing that. And that AI replaces senior as well. It replaces me long before it replaces you and you, Jomo. But so that might be, within my term to retirement. I might be okay, but I might not be okay as well. And then the next step in relation to how arbitration in particular changes with AI is decision making. And the machine arbitrator, when does that come online, and how well does it work? And there are a whole raft of ethical questions that are involved around that. There's also a question of whether a machine arbitration award is enforceable, and without dramatic intervention from nation states, or I'm not saying that intervention is necessary, but as the current legal framework applies under the New York Convention and all but a few national arbitration laws, a machine-created arbitration award is enforceable exactly in the same way as a human-created arbitration award is. And so let's say that we reach the conclusion, which I'm not saying we are, because hopefully there'll be some input from others as well, but let's say we decide that machine arbitration is bad, right? And then we prefer humans because only humans understand humans. Now, of course, it's not right because machines are much better once they're taught at being impartial. As humans, we are much worse at being impartial because we have preconceived ideas about everything, and we bring them. It's actually what you pay senior lawyers for. You pay us for our preconceptions about a particular case. You know, we understand, we've seen these cases before, and we can tell you quite quickly, that's a winner, that's a loser, that's good, that's bad. But machines take away the bias. So as deciders, they are far more equal to questions of gender, questions of origin, questions of religion, questions of belief. So there are many advantages to having a machine arbitrator. We might want them, but if we don't want them, we're going to have to do something about that. And there are also questions on the way. So let's say we decide we want human arbitrators only, but this human arbitrator doesn't use AI, and this human arbitrator does use AI. Do we need to tell the parties? Should we disclose that we are using AI? I see somebody nodding there. I'm using my reading glasses, so I can't say who it is. Perhaps we should disclose everything, but then do I also need to disclose that I'm using Google for my research? Do I need to disclose that I'm using Lexis for my research? A lot of the descriptions of the legal research that AI can help us with, they're already there, right? When I put into LexisNexis, I don't know, a legal provision and say, find me a case, it comes with a little summary about the case. So it's already, you know, we're already 5. So why do I have to disclose that? Sorry, why do I not have to disclose that, but I do have to disclose that I'm using a machine to write my first draft of the award? Why do I have to disclose that I'm not even looking at the award that the machine drafted for me, right? I sign it. So I don't think anybody would agree with that unless the parties have agreed in advance that you have a machine arbitrator. But there are all kinds of questions that are arising. One of the, I'm going to show you this document, and you can all read it because you don't need glasses at your age. It's the Silicon Valley Arbitration and Mediation Center guidelines on the use of artificial intelligence in arbitration. It's a draft, and they're inviting comments now from anybody in the world, including presumably from AI. I don't know if AI has been told, but but they're inviting comments from everybody in this room, and you should look it up. Silicon Valley, obviously, they're interested in AI, and so they've published a draft ethical code for the use of AI. And some of the issues deal with this question of disclosure, but they don't yet deal with the consequences of disclosure. And also they take the approach that the user is responsible, and I think that is where general regulation is lacking. The focus on the user is not enough, I think, and what might lead to a dramatic response later on. But it's very interesting. It doesn't ask the question, which I'd be interested in views, and so I should probably shut up now. But it doesn't ask the question whether, if I use chat, tell me a name of another artificial intelligence. And Bard, okay. And you use Bard, but counsel for one side uses chat. Does that create a conflict? Or, if two counsel use two different AI, and the arbitrator uses one of those, is the arbitrator conflicted out? Right? Or do we need to agree at the beginning of every arbitration process, in this arbitration we're going to use that? Or maybe it's bad that we all use that because there's no diversity of thought. Maybe we don't have to disclose it at all because it's a tool. The draft code suggests that experts should always disclose what they're using, and I think that makes sense. They're experts, we want to challenge their methodology. But of course, with the black box problem of AI at the moment, we don't know what the methodology is if they use AI because nobody knows. It just comes with an answer, and it's difficult to ascertain. I'm right? Yes. Okay. So anyway, these are some of the interesting issues which arise from AI in arbitration. And the main question which I am challenging my children with is what profession should they choose as they complete university and go into their adult life.
Thank you, Shai. Senior Counsel, we'd just like to hear your thoughts on the issues that Shai has raised. Particularly, do you think arbitrators should indicate when they use ChatGPT, for example, in writing part of the award?
No, I don't think so. I think after a while, you know, as we begin to accept the advent of technology, innovation, and so on, these things become commonplace. Do you ask me if I'm using Office 365 to write my award? Do you ask me if I'm using an Apple computer? Do you ask me if I'm using Dell? You don't. Do you ask me how I got home? I got from my house to the office in order to attend the arbitration. You might have got on the train. I probably drove. Somebody else walked. That's, you know, those are things that we take for granted because life has advanced to the point where, you know, you accept that I'm there. Now, once ChatGPT or once any form of AI becomes something that is used on a day-to-day basis, and we accept that these are tools that enable us to be able to conduct things efficiently, effectively, and so on, then they go into the background. They just become facilitative. And what matters in the end is the outcome. So whether I use ChatGPT, whether to write my award or whether I reviewed it, in the end, what you're going to be doing is reviewing my award and deciding, is my award enforceable or not? That's really, as far as I'm concerned, all you're concerned with. You're not concerned with how I produce the award. I mean, you might be concerned if you see that my timesheet only sets out 3 hours, then you wonder what happened. But obviously it's a benefit to you as the user. But I think that throughout history, there has been movement, and as we move along, there is always collateral damage. The thing is not to be collateral damage. The thing is still be standing when this becomes something that is part of our daily life. And so I think that, you know, in the same way when we entered COVID, we had all these protocols about virtual hearings. You know, we wanted to say what bandwidth we should use. We wanted to say, you know, what we should have a test before the hearing. We wanted to put in place all these things. Today we take it for granted. You know, if we're going to have a preliminary meeting, and you're in Lisbon and I'm in Nairobi and the other party is in Chile or whatever, we all assume we will log into whether it's Teams, Zoom, WebEx, whatever it is. I mean, Edward speaks out. I was having a chat with Edward at lunchtime, and I was saying to him, when we started out, he would write out his award in longhand. And he said, yes, he would. So would I. And then came to the point where you dictated to your secretary. Then you had a dictaphone. Yeah? Now you type it out on your laptop, and you probably have Grammarly assisting you with your dictation and ensuring that you've got your syntax right and all the words are right. Nobody asks you. Nobody's bothered. You know, in the end, does it read well? Is it enforceable? Does it meet all the parameters? That's what you're concerned about. So my view is that at the present time, it's the novelty of it that is causing us to really introspect, to think through it. What do we do? What's going to happen? You know, what are the protocols? Very soon, I mean, my grandchildren wouldn't think about these things. They'll just do, because that's what AI has taught them to do. They'll be, we talk about digital natives, for instance. They will not understand when I say I used to write my award in longhand. They don't know. They can't imagine it. Yeah? So that's my view on that. I just think maybe we're in a bit of a panic about this.
Michael?
So I'm going to actually not have any doom or gloom. I think it's an unfair advantage, and I think everyone has their own unfair advantage. At the current state, you could utilize even ChatGPT, and you could find ways to utilize it safely without compromising on privacy or leaking confidential information. That creates an unfair advantage to one team as opposed to another team. And that's fair, that's the nature of life. Not everything is fair, as much as we are trying to create fairness in all these safeguards and policies. For example, what Helen had mentioned, what the UK is doing, fairness is a key component. Singapore's own AI framework starts with fairness as well. So it's essentially that fairness will erode, but then again, it's the value derived from it, from what everybody has said. It's a tool. How you use the tool is dependent on how good you've practiced with it and how well you know how to use it. So I don't think we should be up in arms if someone has an unfair advantage. The question should be the level of accessibility. If it then creates unhealthy competition within an industry, should there be a way to making it more accessible? For example, if AI, for example, large language models like ChatGPT, in this case, ChatGPT-4, people have to pay for it. In the case that they make ChatGPT 3.5 redundant, then they do create a case of inaccessibility. There are people who can't afford the service, and maybe it's part of their work, and they need it for their work. So the question, I think, would then shift back to the technology companies and competition authorities in making sure that as much as these tools are here, they do not create unhealthy markets and they're accessible.
I think Michael's absolutely right, and I think it's going to be a key issue for the business of law firms. The firms that have got a competitive edge are going to do very well. And in terms of what is that competitive edge, well, I think as various people have alluded to, that there are concerns around ChatGPT, confidentiality, has it got biases, because in the end of the day, it's only as good as the data that's put in. So what will happen is, and it's already happening, tech companies are going out and trying to sell what they say are better versions of AI that are tailored, that are bespoke. In the London market, we keep getting rung up by firms, and usually they're not telling the truth. It really is just OpenAI that they're trying to pretend is actually bespoke. But it is happening. You are getting tech companies that are using better data, that are using the right data, and that will remove hallucinations. It will remove this problem of AI making up case law as the models are trained on better data. And what will begin to happen, I think, is that the bigger law firms that can afford the better AI are going to have that competitive edge. They'll be able to use it. They'll be able to tell clients that they're confident enough in using it. Their people will become more productive, and they will get ahead, and it will become a bit of an arms race. And it's going to have an impact in the London market. It will have an impact on Kenyan law firms as well. We can't predict precisely how it's going to play out, but it is going to have that impact. I can see a sort of lot of worried faces, but if you flip it, if it was a room full of doctors here and I was saying, well, look, at the moment AI is getting to the point where it can diagnose some forms of cancer better than a doctor, we'd all be saying, well, that's a good thing. It's not a bad thing, it's a good thing. So in one respect, if AI is helping lawyers give a better service for their clients, that is a good thing. If it's driving down the cost of legal services and making it more accessible, that's probably a good thing. There's an interesting statistic, I think it was Jeffrey Sachs, where he said, for every extra sort of 1% of lawyers you have in the workforce, a country is that much less productive. But if you look at it this way, if we have more productive lawyers, it helps everybody. If everyone can access legal services, if everyone can access arbitration, if you know that if someone reneges on a contract, you will have it sorted out cheaply and efficiently, that's probably a good thing for everyone. But that change can be terrifying at the same time. So I think if there's one to away from this, it is going to be a revolution, and it is going to happen. It's probably better to kind of be with it rather than against it in some ways.
I think my final comment will be, I think it's becoming, just listening to my colleagues on the podium, is becoming very apparent that in your deliberations, you absolutely need to have an AI expert. because some of these models, it's not a black box. It's very clear how they are constructed mathematically. Therefore, your understanding of the input and how these things are tokenized or transferred into numbers that are then computed with probability, predictions, and distributions, then we're beginning to really know when and when not to apply it or identify their weaknesses. And there's also a bit about fine-tuning. So for instance, each and every company, including yours, can have its own ChatGPT that is not feeding your company data back to the large models. You can have that as a restriction, which means that you can fine-tune these large language models that are open AI, and build your own internal model that is contextual and understand the context of your customers or your business model, but then also it's not exposing your customer data to the large language models. That's how we use it, at least at Safaricom. And therefore, my ask would be, partner with AI experts that understand the construct and some of these frameworks of the models to be able to be informed on how best to use them in order to protect yourself and obviously the brand of your organization. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Charlotte. Helen, are you still with us? Helen?
Yes, you did cut out briefly, so apologies if I missed.
That's okay. Maybe perhaps you could tell us what are the legal risks in using AI and potential disputes that could arise?
Yes, certainly, and I don't want to be overly negative because I think AI has huge possibilities for the law sector as well as many other sectors. But it is worth thinking about the legal risks when you're implementing AI, just so that you can then mitigate against them. I'm not going to go into detail because you could spend hours going into legal causes of action, and I'm sure nobody has time for that this afternoon. But I think it's worth pointing out a couple of the key ones. So obviously breach of confidentiality and data protection generally, it's been mentioned a few times in this session already. It's always important to think about that both the data that the models are being trained on, so is bespoke data being provided to the AI developer to train the model, in which case is that data confidential? Do you have the right to provide that data to the AI developer, and is the AI developer prevented from then using that data to train other AI models, for example, for other clients? Always something to think about. There's also the issue of confidentiality of the information that you're plugging into an AI model in order to prompt it to produce an output. So, for example, it was well known that a Samsung engineer actually put into ChatGPT, an earlier version of ChatGPT, part of confidential source code to see if it could work out what was wrong with the code. And actually that engineer didn't realise that ChatGPT then trained on the prompts that were put into it. So that source code was effectively no longer confidential. That isn't the case with the latest versions of ChatGPT, and I think a lot of AI models have now been developed so that any prompts are confidential, but it's definitely something you should check before using an AI model, or just avoid inputting any sort of confidential data whatsoever. The second one is professional negligence. Leila, you yourself mentioned the fact that those lawyers in the US were pulled up for putting in documents into court that contained submissions about cases that were completely fabricated. They're called hallucinations. AI does it a lot. It's because of the way that large language models work. They simply put together words which they think go together based on a huge amount of data that they're trained on, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they're right, and they state their answers very confidently, but it might be confidently wrong. So it just means that we need to review the output of AI models to make sure that there aren't potential claims, for example, for professional negligence, if we as lawyers use AI in our jobs. Another potential dispute that could arise is a product liability claim. Obviously, if you've got an AI system within a product and that system goes wrong and the the product causes harm to an individual. It might be that you end up bringing a product liability claim. We might see those coming out. Certainly, I know that the European Union is bringing in a directive to basically introduce a rebuttable assumption that an AI system, if harm is caused by a product that contains an AI system, that there is a causal link between the AI and the harm, simply because consumers will find it difficult to prove where the causal link is. So it will be for the developer of the AI system to show that actually the system didn't cause the harm. We've already touched on breach of IP laws, so I'm not going to go into detail, but it's definitely one to think about. We've talked about the Getty images and Stability AI, and the fact that Getty are actually suing Stability AI for misusing its photos and producing new pictures that actually have the Getty watermark on them. So it was obvious that Getty photographs that attracted copyright had been used to generate these new photos, and there's a question around whether that actually amounts to breach of copyright or not. We probably need new legislation on that in order to come out with a definitive answer on it. Obviously, we've mentioned breach of equality laws. AI models are only as good as the data that they rely on. So if the underlying data is biased, the outcome will be biased, and you need to review the outcome to make sure it isn't biased. It's public knowledge that Amazon actually scrapped an early AI model that they were using that reviewed job applications because they discovered it was biased against women because the underlying data was biased, essentially. So these are not reasons to avoid AI or not to implement AI. It's just good to make sure that everyone understands what the risks are, so mitigate against them. The one last one that I would mention is just unintended consequences generally. The difficulty with AI is that it's generating an output that you might not necessarily program it to create, but it's decided that that's the output that it should generate. So it's just something to be aware of, that there may be claims down the line for reasons that we just don't know right now, but it's because the technology is developed in a way that we didn't know it was going to develop. So there's not really a good answer to that one. It's just a case of making sure that we audit the technology and the outputs in order to make sure that it's not generating consequences that might have legal implications in the future.
Thank you, Helen. John, what Helen has discussed about the risks, are there potential mitigations?
Yeah, thanks, Leila. So yes, I think some level of mitigation, but I think it's largely we develop as we go along. I think you can only do so much because the area is changing on a day-to-day basis. But I think there has to be a lot of framework development. I think Ambassador spoke about it from the Kenyan perspective in terms of regulation. Some limited form of regulation, I think, would certainly be good. There has to be, I think, data governance, data protection. I think locally here we do have our data protection laws, so you just make sure that you actually comply with those and you don't get yourself in a problem with the data commissioner. Some level of enforcement, I think it's also good because without enforcement, the rules just remain that. And I think from a practice perspective, there has to be a lot of change management within our own organizations because you find that if you don't do that, and I think I mentioned this before, some level of resistance that comes into that, and the uptake of the system then is also not the best. Just one last point I can make, and I think Mike commented on this before, and also Charlotte. I think there are different types of AI out there. And I think for our industry and our practice, maybe the idea is not to go for the generic type and try and see if you can get one that is tailored for the market that you're serving in. It may come with a cost, of course, but it also, I think, reduces and mitigates the risks that Helen has talked about. Thank you.
ahead, Michael.
Maybe just to speak on one risk that I recently came to not treat as a risk, but as an inherent thing that we should allow AI to do, is that when we find out AI is inherently biased towards certain dispositions, that is an opportunity to correct our own inherent biases, because they are feeding off biases that we have. Some of them might be right in our faces, others could be hidden. And AI, when it does something wrong because of a bias, it's very right there in your face. So that exposes existing biases. So that necessarily does not mean, like, I don't what Amazon did. In the past, I would have been pro that, but presently I'm like, it's already identified one bias, let it keep going. You'll run your process for recruitment separately without the AI model, let the AI model do a parallel one, and find out what other biases exist, because stopping it by when you see your first bias, you're creating blind spots where you won't see other biases. So you're just digitizing your bad problems and you're carrying it along with your solution, so nothing changes. There's no value in having an AI system that delivers court decisions in minutes, but still has an issue of discrimination against certain populations.
Michael, it's very interesting that you brought up that point. During the Monday cocktail, the table I was standing with, there's someone who raised the issue of, and they said, when you're bringing up the child, the scriptures say, bring the child in the ways of the Lord. Same thing with AI. The way you said, it's what you feed in. If there's bias, that's what will come out. So that's an interesting point. I think we've had a long session, a long afternoon, and just as we wrap up, perhaps now we just hear from Senior Counsel and Shai on the opportunities on AI and automation presents in the future for dispute resolution. How does that look like?
Me?
Yes.
Okay, me first? Okay.
No,
Opportunities.
you speak to
Now
it.
I need to be optimistic? Okay. So some of the optimism I derive from my pessimism. As you have heard before, and my co-panelists know, I think that governments are missing a trick by not regulating now, and that there will be, I foresee quite a dramatic backlash from society at some point, 2 years, 5 years. At some point, there will be a lot of economic change in society. AI will continue to be abused in the way that Michael described earlier. There will be a lot of fraud, a lot of unacceptable conduct. And then suddenly states around the world will wake up and say, we can't take this anymore, it's banned. Or they might say, this part of it is banned. So how is that positive for lawyers? It's positive for lawyers because if you take a company that's invested billions of dollars in creating an AI and you ban it, there's an investment treaty arbitration there for us to all engage in. And I think that is an issue which might arise in the future, so more work for those lawyers who then remain. The other, I don't know if it's an opportunity, but issue which might arise through similar regulation is arbitrability. The question of whether certain issues will be legally referable to arbitration, in the same way that criminal law currently isn't. Perhaps issues of identity and classification of humans versus machine, whether a human with a chip in his brain or her brain, or a machine that feels emotions, whether they are human or machine, that might be an issue which states might reserve for themselves. So another interesting question. Can AI contract with each other without human? Interesting issues which we are yet to face.
Yeah, let me just try and be brief. I think that all the vices and all the problems that we identify with AI are problems that are inherent in society. It isn't that AI has suddenly thrown up all these issues. Even if we did not have AI, we would have fraud, we would have child molesters, we would have all these things that we talk about. So really, the way I see it is that we should look at the opportunities that AI presents. And I think those opportunities have been well expounded by Jomo. Alan has spoken about them. Of course, Michael and Charlotte have really told us what direction we should be looking. And I'm really grateful to Charlotte for really letting us know that actually it's not a black box. You know, it is verifiable. You know, you can see, you can determine what you need to do with AI, what goes in and what comes out. So I think the efficiencies that AI brings in our daily processes, in our arbitral processes, simple things like simply, for instance, diarizing and coordinating your diary across all the parties is something that AI will enable. Recording, transcription, writing awards. You know, I have no difficulty with AI writing my award because I truly think that AI is still in its very, very nascent stages, and it will improve incrementally. I remember years ago, Google leading me down a cul-de-sac and I having to reverse and find my way, you know. But today, it will take you anywhere, you know. I know certainly there have been problems with the case you mentioned about Google Maps not identifying a bridge that was not there. But today, you can go anywhere in the world, hire a car, and get yourself where you need to go.
is white, not for purposes of any form of bias, and John is black. It might be useful for me to know that. So if we create a veneer and decide that we're having AI to have a uniform standard, while it might be in principle good, is it useful for us to have it wipe away the biases that we think are bad as humans, but we're able to make judgment calls on when that diversity, when that difference is actually good. So I'd definitely want to hear your comments on how we make AI or limit the harm. I think the speaker on the screen spoke about it, Helen, she did speak about it. So happy to hear your views first, and then as the rest of the panel.
I think I'll start. There's what we call life cycle of AI. At the very basic, it's what we call descriptive. So it describes what data you've given it. You know, how many people are in the room, what's the gender, and so on. And then there's a bit around diagnostic, which answers the question, if something happened, what caused it to happen? So in business, it will be, or let's say in your area, if a lot of people in your law firm have lost cases, what caused those, if let's say you've got a high loss ratio, I don't know if there's a key measure in your environment, but then the rate at which you're losing cases is high, you can build a model to determine and diagnose as to what would have led to those cases being lost. There's a third piece that's called predictive. So predictive is where it predicts what's likely to happen given what's been given the data that you've put to it. Now, in order for you to control for bias, there's a couple of things that you need to do with the models. I'm saying it's very important as you explore some of these models to have an expert in-house. So in order, firstly you have to say, here's the data, segment it for me. If you see there's a few segments that is, or the data is dominantly male, and then a very few females, then obviously when you do a prediction generalization, most output will reflect males because they weigh more in the data that you've fed it. But what would have informed that, it's a preliminary analysis that you will have to look at the different segmentation. You call it unsupervised learning. Because most of AI solutions are supervised. And by supervised, I mean you have labeled your data, that good, bad, good, bad, good, bad, and then you feed it with parameters or characteristics of those good, bad, good, bad. Yeah? So you're a good student, and parameters is that you go to school every day, you wear your uniform, your school, whatever. So all those parameters you feed it. And then it determines, then you label a good person, a bad person. When you then get new people presented to the model, it needs to decide whether this person is good or bad. It would have been trained on those outcomes. Now, unsupervised is where you just throw in the data and the model summarizes different groups in the data for you. Then you can be able to see some of the biases that exist inherently in data that will then make your model to be biased. What I'm saying sounds a little bit complicated, but for an expert, it's super easy. And that is why I would really encourage these questions about bias. It's something that we always control for as experts, but there are mechanisms for us to pick up in the data and therefore to make sure that we minimize them.
I think I'd say you start with your use case. What are you trying to accomplish with the AI? Do you have the right data for it? At that stage, you do something that we call EDA, exploratory data analysis, which involves everything Charlotte has spoken about. Segmenting your data, labeling your data accurately. If your data is mislabeled, it's garbage in, garbage out for the AI. Remember, AI lacks epistemology. It lacks a theory of knowledge. So it's just a machine that's learning from what it's given. If you give it a bunch of knives and tell it they're candles, it knows no better. So that's very important. Also important what she's mentioned is having the right team. I believe in in bias minimization, not in bias control, because the AI, if the AI systems fail, you should not revert to a biased system that you are using before. So with bias minimization as opposed to bias control, it allows you to continuously see developing biases. For example, you find a bias with, let's take, for example, I don't know if what she mentioned is a loss ratio, if that exists in law firms. You find there's a bias with a judge who always rolls to the plaintiff in the afternoons. Maybe he has to go rush for a game of golf. Do you remove that bias? But it serves a purpose. And if you remove that bias from your AI model and you decide to revert back to your system, then you go back to a losing formula. So tweaking both of them to move in parallel is what I believe in. So I focus on bias minimization as opposed to trying to control or eliminate all the bias. Because inherently some biases are known to people and can be used by people to make good judgment. You may know there could be a form of discrimination that exists towards, let's say, women who are trying to claim assets that have been stolen from them. If you tell the AI women are being it knows women are being discriminated against by all the data it has learned, then you can do some reinforcement learning to put with it guardrails to understand how this is being used. As much as it's going to say, this is what we should do, and the world keeps doing this, then the data you're feeding it becomes data it does not want to learn on. And if there's something very difficult to do with artificial intelligence is machine unlearning. We have machine learning, which is very easy. You can imagine machine unlearning. You have these models which are using hundreds of billions of parameters. That's how it's been trained on. And it now has something that needs to be removed from its training set. It is extremely expensive and inefficient. It's estimated to cost anywhere between 50 million to 100 million US dollars for the top 5 largest AI companies to do machine learning. So you can see the cost of that. So I vote, or I prefer, move with the biases as you put in reinforcement learning, as you do prompt engineering and further fine-tuning to control those biases and not to delete them, because you're deleting them from a technology, not deleting them from society. So you're telling it to ignore or assume it's not there. And I think that also creates a new inherent problem for you.
I might just add, from a sort of lawyer's perspective, I'm really positive about AI actually compensating for the biases we all have as humans. As John said earlier, we're all human, and these biases are there already, and also our behavior is human. And there was a study that we were discussing earlier around Israeli judges who were granting prisoners parole. And the study found that in the run-up to lunchtime, if you are less likely to get parole than if you saw that same judge after lunch. The judge was in a better mood after lunch, maybe a bit tired, more inclined to let people have their parole. And that study was shown statistically over months and years. So we're all products of our behavior and biases. My favorite law case ever is a case where a judge in the commercial court in London was on a case for hundreds of millions of pounds against British Airways. It was British Airways cartel case. Over the weekend, he went on holiday to Italy. He flew British Airways. They lost his luggage. When he came back on Monday, he lost his temper. And he first ordered the lawyers to tell him where his luggage was. And then they said to him, you're going to have to recuse yourself now. You're hopelessly conflicted. And he then accused them of deliberately losing his luggage so that he would lose his temper and recuse himself. And that happened in the commercial court in London. Usually the commercial court in London is very good and the judges are very measured and calm, but this gentleman wasn't. And it's my favorite case, but that's an example of human behavior or human biases. I think what makes me positive about artificial intelligence is that we're aware that these biases are there. Over time, they will be ironed out and measures will be taken against them. And as the computers get more and more powerful, you will actually have a better result. I think particularly for lower value claims, I think it's going to be harder for clients to accept bigger value claims, but I think it will bring access to justice for lower value claims, which at the moment people haven't got the money to prosecute. But it will also help in other areas. One of the things, and I'll finish here, that people have talked about this week is the appointment of arbitrators in international arbitration and where those arbitrations are seated. And I think a running theme has been that many African arbitrators are really eminent and capable, but aren't chosen by parties or by institutions for whatever reason. As AI gets more powerful, it will be used to appoint arbitrators. And it may be that it's actually less biased than the institutions are at the moment, where humans are making those decisions. So I'm quite positive that actually over time, artificial intelligence will be less biased than humans, and perhaps less prone to bad behavior, whether you've had a long lunch or whether your luggage has been lost by the airline that you're judging. So I'm positive about AI in terms of removing those biases.
Kananu asked for the question as to whether I would disclose if I'm using AI. I think it's really on the same footing as the question what my library looks like, whether I've subscribed to Clua or whatever. It really.
Let me clarify.
Would I need counsel to tell me whether they're using AI or ChatGPT to do their research for their closing submissions?
On that particular point, I don't think I was clear. I think in terms of the judgment that's being expressed in the award and the costs. So for me, it was two things that I was concerned about with the disclosure or non-disclosure of utilization of AI by professionals generally, but in this case, lawyers. So if there's supposed to be personal liability or professional responsibility for the decisions that are being made, and therefore potential queries as to how you got to where you got to, would we then say, if at all, a comma, and I think sometimes in law we've encountered some arguments about where the comma was placed, what it meant, were you certain about what you meant or intended and the outcome? So such things. So if we then rely on editor, Grammarly, whatever other tool, and in this case put in ChatGPT or other, I mean, I've learned a couple of things from Michael here, but so if you then put them in and the parties don't know about it, who do we say is responsible for it? Does the arbitrator get to absolve himself from the decision saying, hang on, there's a mechanism here created to serve and help me with this process?
The arbitrator signed the award. It's his award. He's responsible. It's, for me, as simple as that. The arbitrator cannot fob off his award and say AI was responsible. In the same way, if counsel was compiling their documents and there was a whole bunch left, you're not going to blame your clerk and say my clerk left out this whole bunch of documents. Or if you're doing e-discovery and something goes wrong, you're not going to blame your software. Or if you're transcribing your evidence and there's a whole lot of evidence left out, you can't fob it off to the stenographer or the transcription service that you're using. Eventually, and I think we understand that, the responsibility is yours. What you use are just tools to facilitate the outcome that you get to. What I think would be dishonest, and I think this is a matter of integrity, is for me to use AI or ChatGPT to write my award and then still charge you hours and hours for that award, as if I had sat there all night, for a fortnight, sort of typing out the award. I think that then becomes a matter of integrity. But that's a different thing altogether.
So I think the issue arises not with the use as a tool. The issue arises with the concern that AI will have decision power. And then if you're delegating, and this is what I said before, if you're delegating your responsibility to, be it ChatGPT or a tribunal secretary, without informing the parties and getting their consent, then maybe you have a decision. Obviously, the technical writing the award, you put in, you tell, I'm just going to say chat because I don't know the other AI names, but you put into chat, draft me an award on these facts that comes out with this solution. There's no disclosure there in my opinion at all. But if you're starting to use AI to decide an issue, even based on your previous awards, then there is a question, have you delegated? Even if it's only 3 hours, we're paying you. We want your judgment. And if it's somebody else's or a machine's, then maybe we're okay with it, maybe we're not, but we should know. That's the Grammarly and AI distinction, I think. And I haven't answered, I don't know what the answer is in terms of what is better. Is Shai better than a machine? Currently, maybe me. In 15 years, maybe the machine, yeah, you know. No, I retire in 10. My plan is to retire in 10.
I think this is a good place to end the discussion. I'm going to give each of the panelists exactly 10 seconds to make your closing remarks. Jomo, we'll start with you as we head down this way.
Thanks, Leila. I think for me is embrace technology, even in our own operations as law firms. It's here to stay, and if you don't embrace it, then you'll be out of the game. And I think there are also so many opportunities arising from these new ways of doing things. So identify them, take advantage of them. I've learned today that we have software engineers who can do a lot of AI stuff. Speak to them and see whether or not you can be able to generate a tool which is very specific for the Kenyan market, for example. So I think the opportunities are there. Identify which jobs, I think you guys have identified what is on the way out. So there's a risk, of course, of some job loss and things like that in the future, and adjust yourself accordingly. But I think embrace AI. I think it's the way of the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Jomo. Shai, 5 seconds.
I second all of that, but directed particularly at the younger lawyers. Some of us are so fixed in our ways that we actually will turn to younger lawyers to help us use this and protect your position and advance it by understanding the inputs, understanding how to use it, and step up to it.
Let me use my 5 seconds to correct the impression.
3 seconds.
The impression you had at the outset that I was out of my depth. Michael and I have done a lot of work around this subject, so we're on the same footing.
I get 2 seconds?
Yes.
Right. Okay. I think learn the right way to use AI tools safely, whether they're the publicly free ones or ones which you're going to purchase. It's a tool. Let it be on fair advantage. So get also the experts who can help you get the right tool. Don't use a jackhammer to hit in a nail. Yeah.
I agree with everything that's been said. I think that the thing for me is to keep learning. As lawyers, we should always keep learning anyway. I've learned a lot on this panel from everyone, but from Michael and Charlotte in particular. So I think particularly the young lawyers, we all hate technology. That's why we're lawyers. We like writing things. We don't like using tech. We should learn from the people who know how tech works, and we should embrace it, as Jomo says.
Great. I think from my side, just from my recent graduation at MIT, the big theme was technology, humanity, and innovation. Than just technology, it also requires humanity and effective leadership. So we have a responsibility to use technology for humanity and applying effective leadership in making sure that we advance humanity and we're not destroying humanity. Thanks very much.
I think the panel has done a fantastic job and they deserve a huge round of applause. Thank you very much. There's a demand that you need to clap for the moderator. Thank you very much from the panelists, Jackie. That's all from our end. Thank you for listening to us. I'll hand over now back to the NCIA group.
Someone is asking who asked that the moderator be applauded. We ask AI. If you're like me who has sat in and listened, I think we came in thinking the good, the bad, and ugly. I think we are living with the good, the better, and the best. Deconstruction, retooling. For those who are young, I think I had retool what you're trained to be. For John and the ones on that end, I don't know what we'll tell them to do. But certainly AI is here. Change is terrifying. I think Shai said that. But we have to confront it. And it's for our good, for our destruction, I think, as we have been told. There are moral issues. I believe we are better equipped to converse with this very changing and evolving topic. And now before they leave the stage, we will not ask AIA. I'll ask my chairperson to come and give a couple of gifts to our very good, excellent panel. So, Jackie.
How sure are you that it's me and not my image and voice? All right.
Or maybe let them stand first and take a photo as a panel. Then.
John, why is everyone saying you're old?